This story starts with a fool's errand. And whether one could say it went horribly wrong or horribly right is irrelevant. The black and white of it doesn't really matter, because regardless, it changed the course of history for good. Both simple and yet way too complicated, it started with a few well-known thieves in the kingdom bickering over something that didn't matter enough to remember. It wasn't unusual. The bickering would go on for a while, and then they'd all go fix the problem and be done with it. Usually it had to deal with food, so they'd pilfer something to sell or trade for a dinner or two. Maybe even breakfast if they were lucky. They'd done it plenty of times, even made some friends out of it. That was the simple part. The complicated part came with the hunger of too many skip meals and a quip that should have been ignored or, better yet, swallowed during a seemingly pointless argument. And that was all it took for an easy job to become the heist of a lifetime. The sad part about it all is that no one involved could remember what had been said. As time would go on and the story was told over and over again, the details never stayed the same. Not for when it happened, where it happened, or even a vague approximation of what was said. It was anyone's guess. That single insult that would test fate's design was forever lost to time. A real bummer for anyone trying to keep track of those sorts of things. Anyway, one of those thieves, the louder one with a temper and a reputation to keep, they went by the name Gallows. At some point, that name may have meant something. Maybe they'd had a family or a home even to give it that meaning. No one was sure. But none of that really mattered to them. Because well into their adult life, Pan had all of a hole in the wall to their name. A small cross between a crawl space and a cellar high up in the city's shells built out of what had probably once been grain storage to a now dilapidated house. They'd stocked it with some comforts and trophies from successful heists and other jobs. It was dry in the rainy season and kept the wind out when it got cold. They'd even managed to dig a tiny chimney into the cliffside to keep warm. It was small and smelled of earth and didn't have a lock, but that was okay because no one cared enough for the external structure to come looking. It had been salvaged for parts years ago, and so the sheer lack of attention it brought kept their home safe from any wandering eyes. They had lived there for as long as they could remember, and if they were lucky, it was where they would one day die. Already buried within the cliff walls of the city and surrounded by everything they'd ever called home. With a life like that, a name was just a name. And the name Pan Gallows went far enough on its own. It carried the right weight to keep their reputation. At least, it had for quite a while by then, and it would continue to for a long time to come. Eventually going farther than anyone could have ever imagined. But going back to just before the story began, Pan had been on the wrong side of that argument. They'd been the loud one, who'd skipped too many meals after a job gone wrong and wound up with their ego bruised after a bad one-liner. By morning, they were already 3 steps into the biggest heist they'd ever planned. And it was probably the most thought they'd put into their job in quite some time, because it only seemed right if they were going to rob the king himself. The Kingdom of Commons was a hub of travel and trade between the parallel realms. It was a waterside city-state carved into the fords of a mountainous corner of the Shattered Realm called the Trickster's Pass. There were residents, both temporary and permanent, but with the Great Gate of Commons providing routes to anywhere across the realms, most that came through this otherwise isolated city weren't there to stay. Filled with tourists and traders, no one would miss the odd coin or ring or whatever that they had stuck in their pocket. And if one were quick enough and timed it right, food was easy to steal right off the stalls. There was a general equilibrium in Commons and everyone got by, including the thieves. Usually. At least, that's how people spoke of it. But those were tourists for the most part, so make of that what you will. As for the people of Commons themselves, thieves were a part of life. Sure. But they didn't really talk about whether or not the poor fuck in the back of the bar had eaten anything other than his drink that day. Such an occurrence was simply a fixture to the backdrop of such a busy place. The Kingdom of Commons was a constant that went on through time and ages as history passed by, somehow always in the middle of it all, but never seeming to truly change. because it was already in a state of flux to begin with. Out with the old, in with the new. Last month's traders would go off to another continent and another realm, and new ones from just across the rifts would take their spot at the market faster than anyone would notice. Change was always a present there, and yet, to many, in its own odd way, it always stayed the same. The constant cycling of traffic and trade meant that the population always seemed to level out. The ferries to the gate kept moving, the traders at the ports kept shouting their wares, and the populace that called Commons home had their routines alongside it all. With a culture like that, rumors ran rampant, all across the parallels from one land to the next. Legends and tales were traded and exchanged about the city. In such a connected age where anyone could travel just about anywhere, there were all sorts of stories told about the kingdom. Whether or not they were true was hardly ever the point, and this was especially true in the streets of Commons itself. Both fact and myth became one and the same as time went on, and no one could recall how exactly the kingdom had come to exist in this way. And they definitely couldn't tell you how it stayed so well sustained in its ebb and flow. Despite this culture of curiosity and speculation, magic was known to be well kept by the gods. Yet, no one could deny the existence of the gates and the majesty of all they could do, and how such powerful magic was kept under the control of commons. The king himself was known to be a recluse and never seemed to leave his palace halfway up a mountain where it watched over the entire city. And so, those rumors ran their course. The most popular being that the King of Commons could only be one of the arisen Philae, the pantheon of 7 gods that ruled over the parallels. It made sense that one of these gods would keep an ever-present eye on the gate, even if he was a mystery. But no one really thought too hard about it because things worked well enough that he must have been doing something right. There was evidence the man existed, and since so much of Commons consisted of temporary guests passing through, that was enough for them. To describe the city any further would be a redundant mess of contradictions and tongue-tied history. So back to the heist. Much like how it all started, it was simple enough if pen to paper. Get in, then get out, with a few steps in between. Unfortunately, Pan never learned to read or write, so it wasn't mapped out at all. All that said, even though Pan put the effort to plan out a few steps for this heist considering the target, it was really just for the hell of it. They had something to prove, even if they couldn't remember what. The plan went something like this. Follow a palace guard up to the uppity pubs on the good side of town. Wait until he got shit-faced, steal his uniform, and dump him in the alley. Then watch for the morning shift change and sneak into the palace, ditch the noisy armor, and snatch the first thing of value Pan could see. That was the in part of the plan. The out would be more improvised, which was better left for when they knew what they were working with. And maybe they were more than 3 steps in by morning, but hell if they were counting. So they got in. The armor hanging off their skinny frame was noisy, which put a rush on the ditch it part. No one seemed to notice. Inside, the palace was quiet. No guards, no nobles, no royalty, not even a maid. The hallways were pristine. No sign of dust anywhere. Pan's footsteps echoed through the marble hallways, swallowed by their seemingly endless lengths. Despite the mountains surrounding them, the rising sign to the east poured through the windows, lighting up the stillness of it all. And the hallways, no matter how many turns Pan took, always returned them to that same eastern side. It was confusing, but it wasn't like Pan ever spent time in the wealthy estates, let alone the palace. Their typical targets were unobservant, well-off tourists who kept their pockets all out in the open. So what would Pan know about the homes of royals? They wrote off the weirdness as their own lack of experience and kept it moving. Compared to the constant hub and trade throughout the port city, the silence inside was deafening, lifeless, and to Pan, creepy as shit. But they weren't gonna complain. Having no one around only made their job easier. They slipped through the first unlocked door they could find, eager to get out of the echoing hallways before they could give themselves away, and came upon a simple study. Nothing as extravagant as they'd been expecting from the palace, but definitely nicer than any place Pan had ever slept. The royal insignia glinted from above yet another eastern window, reminding them that they were definitely still in commons. The symmetrical wings that framed a simple diamond shape, forged in gold, was the same as what lined the streets and flags in the city, though those were far more colorful. Familiar as it was, the way the light played off the metallic sheen inside the study felt like something uncanny, diffused and just outside of focus. On the far wall, beneath the insignia, a well-carved and cared-for wooden desk sat with the chair empty, facing the door. Some shelves lined to the brim with scrolls, leather-bound books, and expensive-looking sculptures in all sorts of metals and designs circled the space, glinting in the pristine light. Delicate curtains danced in the wind of the open window, silent, casting nearly no shadow, and the only movement Pan had seen since they'd stepped inside the palace grounds. It was eerie. None of the books had a single letter written on the spines, which even Pan knew was weird, and all the metal reflected more like the sun on water, like they were down by the port and not clear across the city and partway up the mountain. Pan padded carefully across the marble floor and over the woven carpet in the center of the room towards the desk. With the door shut, the sound of each step no longer echoed, but as they neared the window, the distant sound of the city met their ears, filling the air with life at last. A quick glance down confirmed that, from the study, it wasn't even a 10-foot drop to the ground below. Not a guard to be seen despite the recent shift change. Pan found that to be a shit decision, but they weren't about to think too hard about the king's choices towards palace security when it only made their job easier. So, that would be the out part of the plan. Unwilling to step back into the hallway and risk being heard, they scanned the room for potential spoils. The trinkets, books, and metal diagrams that filled the shelves would have all sold for a good enough price at the right place. But something about the uncanny look of it all made Pan feel wary, remembering the rumors and folklore that told of the king's supposed magic, that he may have been a god even. Pan may not have been the best educated, but they had good instinct, and that instinct was telling them not to touch those walls or any of the valuables on them, no matter how easy it would be. After one more glance out the window to check the escape route, Pan turned around to the desk and set to checking the drawers. One hand already in their pocket to fish for their lockpick, they tried each of them. Most were open, filled with parchment, scrolls, ink quills, and other strange devices like the ones on the walls. Nothing Pan cared much for. Halfway through, the top left drawer resisted. Locked. Pan whipped out their tools and set to work. If they were abandoning the part of the plan to grab anything, then they were going for the best spoils this room had to offer. Something a lock and key nearly always guaranteed. Behind them, the curtains continued to billow gently in the wind, the fabric tickling their hair as they crouched down to get a better angle. It popped open on the first try, the tumblers aligning and unlocking with a familiar. And while Pan couldn't tell the value of anything else in that room with its weird, uncanny sheen, a small leather wallet and a few gold coins was no mystery. Thumbing through the coins, these didn't catch the lighting in the same diffused way as the rest of the room. They looked real enough. Pan fished one out to inspect, bit down on the gold to be safe, and shoved the whole wallet in the inside pocket of their coat once they were satisfied. Easy, and all according to plan. Sort of. But of course, that wouldn't be the end. They felt the curtains breeze across their back again as they stood up, throwing shadows across the eerie, diffused light of the room. Suddenly, Pan felt their gut drop, instinct telling them that something wasn't right, before they could even register that they could no longer hear the distant din and chatter of the city. Looking over their shoulder at the window, at their out, Pan felt their face twist in confusion. The horizon was dark, stars speckling the water where they reflected in the distance. "What the fuck?" Pan whispered, inching closer to the window and scrubbing at their eyes. When they looked back, it was the same. Worse, actually, because Pan realized, with a sinking feeling in their stomach, that the stars they were looking at weren't a reflection on the distant water of the fords. The silhouettes of the mountains were all wrong. Tentative, heart racing with warning, Pan leaned over the window's edge and looked down at the night sky. Their stomach roiled, empty. Nausea brought bile to their tongue as they slowly, blood roaring in their ears, looked up at the city. It was farther than they remembered, even upside down. No longer a short drop to the ground, Pan felt vertigo buckle their knees as they saw the city from far, far away, down the length of a winding spire. The cliff sides that served as a backdrop to everything they'd ever known, stretching around them, up and up and up. Or was it down? Blinking past the way their vision swam, Pan staggered away from the window. The light in the room, still diffused, still strange, now darkened in the sudden nightfall. "I'm hungry. I didn't sleep. This isn't real," they said aloud, matching the turning in their stomach to the pangs of hunger they knew well enough. It was easy enough to believe as they turned their back on the window, not willing to test their own theory as they made for the door this time. Hands shaking as they fumbled with the knob until it opened, and nearly fell tumbling down a winding staircase that definitely hadn't been there when they first arrived. Pan blinked, and blinked, and blinked. They knew magic was real. Even if they hadn't seen the gates firsthand, they'd heard about them. They'd heard plenty of stories from people hailing from all different corners of the parallels who passed through commons. And their friend Ildon, who'd grown up in one of those many corners, spoke often about rumors of a seer outside of town in the weird hovel of a home just above the city shelves. Pan wasn't one to buy into the hype of rumors or a good story for more than entertainment. But they also weren't one to deny more than once what they saw with their own two eyes. "The king has magic. He has to keep the gate open. It makes sense. This doesn't have to be weird." Pan took a deep breath and looked back down the staircase, seeing the way it twisted down, down, down into the darkness. They looked up, but instead of seeing the bottom of the stairs, Pan saw them from above. From below? But which way was up again? If the window outside was upside down, and the room was right side up, and the stairs led down in both directions, Pan closed the door in front of them, turning around to face the window and seeing that the mountains across the river were very much still upside down. Out, how do I get out? They edged on panic, heart deafeningly loud in their ears. They closed that door once and it opened to something different. So, maybe if they opened it again... fuck it. Fortifying all the confidence they could, Pan spun around and opened that door with far more resolution than they felt, and hesitated. Slowly, Pan looked up. A singular figure made its way from the upside-down direction of the stairs. A hand with long, thin fingers trailing the banister, cape dragging behind it and rippling with that same eerie reflection. Like it was an illusion or a trick of the light. Pan's heart threatened to break free of their ribcage, adrenaline surging through their veins as that figure tilted its head back to lock eyes with them. Obscured in shadow, Pan could only make out the grin of something unnatural before their legs were moving on their own, racing down the staircase in the opposite direction. It was a lucky thing that they were used to hauling ass through the uneven cobblestone streets of Commons, or Pan would have tumbled down and broken their neck. Somehow they didn't, though. Somehow they managed. Their grip on the banister all but flung them around and around and around that spiral as Pan fled, the sound of footsteps on marble echoing behind them. Closer and closer. They came upon a door quite suddenly, like it had appeared one moment after the last. Pan threw themselves against it, fumbling with the latch and putting their whole weight into their escape. Sandals slapped against old stone as the door gave way before they tripped on a crack and reared back nearly a moment too late. No longer upside down, Pan fell against the railing of a balcony interlaced with vines, and then they were looking down at everything they've ever known from the top of that twisted spire that stretched into the sky above the mountain range that kept Common so contained. The world was right side up again, and Pan seemed to be at the very top of it. Wind blew through their hair, harder than they'd ever felt it. The air thin, sharp, cold in their lungs. Blood roaring in their ears as their heartbeat threatened to escape them as they looked down from that impossibly tall height. They hadn't even gotten a chance to glance around for another escape route before those footsteps clicked against the same stone they stood upon. I must admit your audacity is quite refreshing. Slowly, Pan turned around, as is your instinct. A number of thieves have attempted what you did, only to fall victim to one of the many temptations left along the way. Congratulations. Pan watched the man as he approached, stepping forward to emerge from the vine-covered tower, tall and lithe in his movements. Eyes bright, gaze penetrating, the right one hidden behind a mask with the glint of some unseen light shining from behind it, a golden wing spreading out from behind his ear on the same side. The regalia of his clothing could only be called ostentatious, asymmetry splitting the continuity to throw off the eye while bright, garish colors worked together in absurd harmony. And at the base of his throat, right where it should dip down into the center of his clavicle, a harsh light broke through, seeping out of shattered lines that spidered across his skin as though he were made of something harsh, brittle, something other than flesh. Rushing wind seemed to blow across him like a light breeze, animating every inch of him just ever so slightly. A thin hand curled up into the air to gesture as he spoke, rising out of the obscuring curtain of his mantle. The glimmer of light on golden rings seemed to comb through the diffusion, caught on his fingertips, distorting everything in that simple motion as though peeling away a veil. And as it left, his smile, thin and just a bit too wide on his handsome face, sent a chill down Pan's back.
Yeah, well, what's the king doing sending his jester after thieves anyway?
Oh, you're mistaken. I handle the security myself.
No wonder your security is shit. You should consider, I don't know, better guards?
The man continued to smile in a way that made Pan feel a little like a rat caught in a trap. Something about it told them that he was humoring them at best. Probably not a good sign. I hardly need more than this. And he gestured at their surroundings as he stepped forward a little bit more. Most don't make it out of the facade below before going mad. So you've proven to be quite special. But there is one dilemma. He stopped a few paces before them, head tilting and eyes shifting to appraise Pan. It was a habit, the way they couldn't help but scowl back, lip curling. While it usually worked to scare away unwanted stares on the streets, it did nothing for them before the grinning mage. The thieves of commons are famous for their expediency and quick wit, but also their hubris, something which you seem to share in, if not exceed. You have quite the reputation, Pangallos. As he spoke, the vines around them began to move, slithering across stone, tendrils of plants curving over his frame before arcing up and over one shoulder from the back, curling together in a helix spiral, extending and growing as Pan watched, transfixed until it stopped, hovering over the mage's outstretched hand. With the faintest glimmer of magic, an apple, shiny and red and tantalizing, materialized from the vines. Plucking it free, he tossed the fruit into the air and caught it, stepping free from the extended vines as they all retreated back to the stones of the tower. His long fingers, adorned with rings, wrapped around the apple like it had been grown to fit in his palm perfectly. Pan couldn't help but stare at the display, a bit of wonder breaking through their fear, something that didn't go unnoticed by the other. So now we must decide, how does this end? His eyes moved upwards to the sky, searching, before darting back to Pan's, bringing the apple up to his lips and taking a solid bite out of it. Chewing lazily as he spoke, his words remained unburdened. What would you call this mission of yours? A failure or a success? Huh? I know you're quicker than that, Pan. Do you call this a failure or a success? And Pan didn't know what to make of that.
I call it bullshit.
The mage's brow furrowed, confused, but curiosity only sparked in his eye. Your mission was bullshit?
This whole thing is bullshit.
Oh, interesting. Why ever would you come to that conclusion? Risking a glance behind them at the seemingly endless drop below, Pan really thought about it for a moment. Something about this man, this magician, had them feeling a bit too much like prey. And though Pan never did foresee a graceful end to their life, whatever was happening here felt far beyond what any street rat could imagine. As they turned back to look at him, he only seemed to smile impossibly wider, as if he'd caught on to the exit they'd just considered. Pan never did enjoy feeling like someone else's entertainment.
What does that even mean?
And maybe it was brash to be so forward right then while awaiting judgment for their crimes. But if they were screwed anyway...
You're a mage. Magic is protected by the gods, so you'd have to know them. Or the king does. The arisen or something, right? I don't know how it all works. I'm not religious. But I am cornered. It caught me. Not much of a head scratcher, is it?
I asked if you'd call this a failure or a success. A binary of options to choose from. And you chose to call it bullshit. His eyes glanced upwards to the sky again, still seeking, before darting back down to Pan's. Still seeking. If you've already found a third option in such a simple scenario, then you're halfway to what I'm looking for. What led you here? And did you succeed or fail? None of what he said made any sense to Pan, but at the very least, that was reasonable. Overhearing some of the wealthier folk who passed through town always sounded, to them, like listening to a whole other language, even when it was one they thought they knew. The realities of the rich and well-off were so far removed from Pan's life on the streets that words would feel distorted in their meaning. No matter how many of the parallels, many tongues they'd picked up over the years, that was one language barrier they could never breach. And if that's how Pan felt about mortals with wallets fatter than their own ego, living lives beyond a thief's wildest fantasies, how could Pan ever understand the bizarre musings of whoever this guy was? A mage? Maybe allied with the gods themselves, and one that had caught a thief in his home, no less. It was absurd that Pan had even tried now that they'd thought about it. They only wished he'd stop whatever game this was and get it over with already.
Do all mages talk like this?
The mage seemed to consider it, a slight frown on his face as he did. Apparently, I do. It almost sounded honest. Pan felt their scowl grow deeper at the immediate feeling of distrust that it brought. Danger and threat they could make sense of. Curious honesty was another matter.
What's your goal anyway?
What is yours? Pan squinted back at him, but harder, feeling like they had a point to make as they returned the scrutiny.
Is this a fucking test?
He shrugged, gesturing with the apple towards Pan, almost like it was an offering. It's a question about a story. Your story specifically. How does it end? This chapter. And with that, he tossed the apple back up into the air towards Pan this time. On reflex, they flinched to catch it, almost fumbling entirely before they caught it between both palms. As they looked down, indignance rose at the fact that they were being fed scraps, only to be forcibly halted in their throat. The apple was whole again, not a bite to be seen, red and bright and real in their hands. They turned it over, expecting to see the glint of illusion or excessive perfection, but it wasn't there. What they saw was an apple, lopsided and a bit green at the stem, as imperfect as nature would intend. Confusion twisted on their face before they caught that too, tempering it down with another scowl. Their lip threatened to curl in a way that often towed a line of disrespect, an inkling that usually ended in a fight at best or real trouble at worst. Confused but unwilling to let it show, they pressed their lips in a furled attempt at a line and tried to put it all together. The ruddy red of the apple still looking up at them, normal and plain and unfitting of such a situation. The whole place was strange. The palace, the study, the tower, the stairs, and every word from this man's lips, it was all off. If Pan was nothing but entertainment for a bored mage of a god or king or whatever, then why would he bother with talking at all? Where was the taunting, the cruelty, the well-deserved punishment for stealing from the palace itself? The mage was still waiting, searching, both the stars and Pan, for some kind of answer. And that made it click. If this conversation and this man were as strange and backwards as the rest of it, then why would he respond to Pan's breaking and entering in any way other than the same? If all this was unpredictable, then why would he be? If everything was already so far off script, then maybe Pan should take the hint and take a chance that this didn't have to end with punishment.
How does it end? You let me go. With all this magic shit. You can make that happen, yeah? I'll give you back your gold. Walk right through that door and be out of here. You'll have your money and I'll have my life.
A quick learner, but you seem to lack the creativity that I need. So Pan hadn't been wrong, not entirely. The mage didn't look mad, but rather oddly let down. Why would you choose such a fate? Now that you've seen all this, now that you're face to face with me, why go back to the way it was? Definitely let down. Pan could only stare at him.
I don't know what you want. My fate is either die here, by your hand, or die in a hole one day. I don't get much say in either option. It's already a stretch to think you'd let me go. Isn't that creative enough?
You were so close. Yet you fall to the same trap even after you've come so far.
This is a test then, is it?
Pan looked over their shoulder one more time for the hell of it. Out of annoyance and frustration more than anything else, really. The conversation definitely had them thinking it the better route. It was the easier one. But with all this mage had shown them in this conversation, Pan had a feeling that wouldn't satisfy the sky. They thought of everything that had happened thus far, through all the illusions. He was asking them to state their own fate, and yet he still held the final decision in the end. How could he not understand that? And Pan's one attempt to try for something different resulting in disappointment proved that they were still at risk of angering him if they didn't choose the path he wanted them to. Pan looked at the mage, the jester probably, and how he stood. Waiting, patient, expecting. What will you do, Pan? Their heads started to hurt, heartbeat pounding in their skull as they racked their brain for the right answer and all the convoluted turnarounds. Everything was off and wrong and weird, and Pan felt like entertainment for this man. But maybe that was wrong too. Maybe, to him, the dilemma was real. He'd called them a quick learner, congratulated their audacity, praised them for thinking of alternatives to a binary. But was that real? Was it true praise if the situation was already turned around from what was to be expected? Was it true choice if the man accused them of not being creative enough when they tried and thus keeping them pinned in the conversation? It was a mess. A head-splitting, frustrating mess of backwards answers and unspoken riddles. And Pan felt like they'd been tangled in a web of it. The mage still waited. Well? Pan squinted against the headache, refusing to break eye contact as they weighed their options, the apple feeling increasingly heavy in their hands. They could jump, that was one exit, and who knew what would come of that, what he could do, if he would do anything. Pan decided they didn't want to risk that scenario. They could give up the gold, ask to be spared. Maybe this was some weird way of setting Pan straight. Ildan always said that the gods worked in mysterious ways. And she sure as hell wasn't wrong about that if this was the company they kept. The obvious answer was to give up, one way or another. Except they tried that, and it was the wrong one, apparently. He clearly didn't want obvious. They thought of his questions again. Why would Pan go back to the way it was? If there was, according to him, a choice in the matter. And a wallet full of gold in their pocket would change their life quite a bit. It's why they'd taken the risk and gotten into this whole thing to begin with. They sure as hell didn't know what this mage wanted. But it was a third option, and third options had kept Pan alive so far. He'd been pleased about it the first time, at least. Maybe not so much the second, but it was all they had to go off of. With their decision made, Pan squared their shoulders as they pushed off the railing, chin high as they eyed the man before them. They tried forcing their expression into something a little more certain. The mage raised an eyebrow in interest, that knowing look ever present but still curious. A contradiction, again. Pan lost the fight and scowled. To them, this whole thing really was bullshit.
Whatever.
They took their first step towards the door, and another, and another. And then they were passing the mage, walking just beyond where the wind blew his cape to flutter over the stones, with the stolen gold still jangling in their pocket. And the mage did nothing, even as Pan reached for the door. No hand came down on their shoulder to stop them. No word to halt. no magic to turn them around. Not yet. With a deep breath in, they turn the knob and step through on the exhale. Their sandals slap down on the familiar cobblestone streets of Commons, morning sun just beginning to crest high enough to shorten the shadows of the stoop in front of their favorite dive bar. Squinting in the bright light as the door slammed shut, Pan took in their surroundings. He'd let them go. They reached down for their coat pocket, grasping fast at the wallet still tucked away. Coins clinking together just as noisy as before, but they pulled it out anyway, just to be sure. The gold was there, all of it heavy in their hands. No sheen or diffused light to signal illusion. Nothing but real, solid gold. They shoved the gold and the wallet back into the hidden pocket of their coat to keep it safe before anyone could catch sight of it. And in their other hand, they held the apple. Normal, imperfect, and looking a whole lot like Pan's breakfast. They must have passed the test. Without giving it any more thought for the moment, not with the headache still pounding in their skull, Pan ignored the shitty bar behind them and started to trek towards the markets. Thoughts of a bigger breakfast kept the whole ordeal at bay. It wouldn't last for long. By lunch, memories of the strange jester mage and his spindly tower above them would return, and Pan would glance up, shielding their eyes against the afternoon sun to try and spot it. They would spend the following days into weeks trying to find the right angle to get a glimpse of what they'd seen up there, up on the mountaintop. Their spoils weighing their pockets down, ignored in favor of greater curiosity and sheer frustration to prove to themselves that they hadn't imagined it all. It was only the beginning of a brand new fascination Pan would stumble into, searching their home city for answers in every corner they could find. And above it all, the King of Commons stood upon his tower, eyes scanning the night sky for what he'd been trying to see for so long. His eyes would start in the east, before drifting down to the parallel gate in the north, lingering, before scanning the horizon in the west and finally arcing back across the sky to the east all over again. A routine he'd been plagued with for what felt like ages past. And they're definitely on the right path. Just a little longer now. His gaze landed on those distant stars, speaking to them as he searched and searched, only to find the faint glint he was looking for. Far, far in the distance. A fleeting encounter he'd become all too obsessed with in the recent age. He knew that it would be gone just as soon as it came, but it brought a sense of excitement nonetheless. They'll be back. King Meska'gais, god of the second star of the arisen Philae, smiled to himself, satisfied in the moment that there was still much more to come. If you enjoyed this pilot episode of As Above, Legend of the Trickster's Pass, please hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications for when the next episode comes out. And don't forget to like the video and leave a comment down below telling me what you think. All of that is a very easy way to support a small creator in this very difficult age to be starting out in. So thanks for tuning in, and I look forward to seeing you next time.